Rain stitched the windows of the waterfront glass pavilion in lines. Inside, warmth rose from hidden vents under marble. A string quartet played near the entrance, but glass and stone threw the notes back brighter than they should have. Vivian Hart paused at the top of the main stair and scanned the room the way she scanned a board deck. Faces, cameras, exits. The silver North Star Dynamics banner behind the auction podium. The black grand piano parked off to the side as decoration lid open like it expected applause. Marla Chen, Vivian's PR chief, leaned in close. "Two outlets are live streaming," she murmured. "The mayor's here. Do the photo with the scholarship kids before the auction, and then we hit your pledge." Vivian gave a small nod. "Keep them moving." Vivian reached back without looking. Her fingers found Ruby's hand. Ruby was 7 small and tense in a navy velvet dress chosen for its softness. Copper curls escaped a satin headband. Her pale gray eyes angled upward. On her wrist, a thin silicone bracelet with raised ridges. She rubbed it when the world got complicated. Ruby squeezed Vivian's hand twice. "Check in." "I'm here," Vivian said low. Vivian said low. Ruby tilted her head. "It's loud." "It's a party," Vivian said. She kept her tone light controlled. "We stay near the wall. If it's too much, you tell me." Ruby's thumb traced the ridges, near the wall. Tessa, Ruby's nanny, stepped to Ruby's other side. Tessa moved quietly, a steady presence with patient eyes. "I've got her, Ms. Hart," she said. Vivian's gaze stayed on the crowd. "Good." They walked down the stairs. The room turned toward Vivian. People smiled too wide. Hands reached. Someone said, "Vivian, incredible quarter." Someone else said, "You're changing the city." Vivian answered on autopilot. "Thank you, appreciate it." Her smile landed clean every time. Ruby flinched when laughter burst near the bar. Her shoulders lifted, trying to fold inward. Vivian leaned down close to her ear. "Breathe with me. In, out." Ruby tried. Her breathing hitched, then found a rhythm. Vivian smoothed Ruby's curls once and stood again. The scholarship kids waited by a logo wall. Cameras rose. A microphone hissed. Vivian took her place in the center. She could feel the room focusing. She lifted her chin. She gave them her practice smile. Ruby tugged at Vivian's sleeve. "Mom?" Vivian kept her smile fixed for the cameras. 1 minute. Ruby's fingers tightened. "Mom!" Tessa stepped in, calm and quick. "Ruby, sweetheart, feel the ribbon on my purse. It's bumpy." Ruby's hand found the ribbon. Rubbed. Let go. The soundscape swelled again. Glass clinked. Shoes scraped. Voices layered into a thick roar. The auctioneer tapped the mic. A sharp pop snapped through the room. Ruby jerked as if struck. Vivian answered a question about North Star's newest robotics contract. Her words came out smooth, confident. Her eyes flicked once toward Ruby, then back to the lens. The chocolate fountain started running. The smell hit first. Warm cocoa, sweet and heavy, mixing with perfume and champagne and someone's citrus cologne. Ruby's nose wrinkled. She pressed her fingers harder into the ridged bracelet. Then a tray clipped a table edge. Not a crash, just enough. Forks and spoons chimed against glass, skittered on marble. The pavilion turned the small accident into a storm of ringing. Ruby went still. For a heartbeat, she did not move at all. Chin lifted, breath trapped high. Then her hands flew to her ears. "No," Ruby whispered. "No, no." The quartet wavered. Conversation dipped. A ripple of attention moved across the room. Vivian heard Ruby before she saw her. The sound was not anger. It was alarm, pure and bright. Vivian broke from the photo line. Heels clicked too loud as she pushed through bodies and perfume and a dozen turned heads. Ruby's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the marble palms, slapping the floor. Her face twisted with pain, like the room had become something physical pressing into her skin. She screamed. The sound hit the glass ceiling and came back bigger, surrounding her. Tessa dropped beside her and pulled a worn stuffed rabbit from her bag. "Mr. Patches," she said, voice soft. "He's here. Feel him." Ruby knocked the rabbit away. It rolled and stopped us against a chair leg. Ruby's scream climbed higher, jagged. A neat circle formed around them. People held their drinks like shields. A phone lifted, then another. Vivian sank to her knees. The marble was cold through her dress. She reached for Ruby's wrist, stopped herself. Tried again slower, like any sudden touch might be another noise. "Ruby," Vivian said low and steady. "I'm right here. Listen to my voice." Ruby could not listen. Her hands were locked to her ears, elbows shaking, body rigid, as if bracing for impact. A woman in a pearl gray suit pushed through. "I'm Dr. Klein," she said, quickly kneeling. "Ruby, follow my voice. In through your nose, out through your mouth." For 1 second, the scream thinned into wet sobs. Vivian's heart lurched. Then Ruby's chest heaved, and the scream returned stronger, as if the brief quiet had only given her lungs time to reload. Someone whispered, "That's Vivian Hart's kid." Marla appeared at Vivian's shoulder, eyes wide, mouth tight. "We can move her out," she said, barely moving her lips. "Now." Vivian did not answer. Her gaze slid across the room and caught on the grand piano untouched. Ruby's scream tore at the air again. Dr. Klein tried pressure points, tried a grounding cue. Ruby flinched away as if the touch burned. Vivian felt something she had not felt in a decade of negotiations and crisis calls. Helplessness thick and hot. Phones hovered at the edge of the circle. Vivian swallowed, tasting champagne she had not even sipped. She leaned close enough that her breath warmed Ruby's hair. "I'm here," she whispered again, like saying it twice could make it true. Ruby did not hear the words. She heard everything else. She heard everything else. The clatter of ice in a shaker, the scrape of a chair, the quartet trying to find its footing, again bows trembling on strings, the soft chorus of voices lowering into that particular tone people use when they want to be kind, but also want distance. Behind the circle, a door marked "Service" opened a few inches. A slice of hallway light fell across the marble like a pale ribbon. A man in a gray maintenance uniform stood there with a cleaning cart half in the doorway, half out. The smell of lemon cleaner clung to him. Rain darkened the shoulders of his shirt. Ethan Brooks had been mopping a spill near the freight corridor when the first scream hit him through the wall. He froze, mop held midair, and the sound did not pass. It dug in. He heard it again, and it became something else. Not a child being difficult, a child being lost. His throat tightened. He looked down at his hands. One thumb had a thin white scar, a half-moon curve near the nail. Old, dull, almost invisible. His grip on the mop handle turned too hard. A voice crackled from a radio clipped to his belt. "All staff maintain position. Stay out of the main hall." Ethan did not touch the radio. He took one step, then another, not fast, not dramatic. Just certain. The cartwheels rolled with a soft squeak. The service door pushed open farther hinges, complaining once. People noticed immediately. Their eyes slid over him and tried to decide if he belonged in the room. A janitor did not belong in the room, not in the center of it, not with the most expensive shoes in the city standing inches from his wet sneakers. A security guard in a black suit stepped in front of him. "Sir," he said firm, "you need to stay back." Ethan did not lift his voice. He did not argue. His gaze stayed on the floor, on the small body shaking on marble. "Let me try," he said, and his voice came out rough, like it had not been used for anything gentle in a long time. The guard frowned. "This is a private event." Ethan swallowed. The scream spiked again, and his jaw flexed. "I can help," he said, quieter than before. The guard shifted his weight, ready to block. Then a sharp, controlled voice cut through the murmur. "Let him." Vivian Hart was still on her knees beside Ruby, one hand hovering near her daughter's shoulder, like a hand hovering near a stove burner. She looked up at the guard, then at the man in gray. Her face was composed, but her eyes were not. They were wide in the way they never were in meetings. Marla's head snapped toward her. "Vivian." Vivian did not look away from Ethan. "Let him," she repeated, and there was an edge in it that made the guard hesitate. Ethan moved past. The circle widened, without anyone touching anyone, bodies pulling back, because no one wanted to be the one who stopped whatever this was. Phones rose higher. Someone whispered, "Is that staff?" Ethan dropped to his knees on the marble, close enough that he could feel the vibration of Ruby's sobs through the floor. He did not reach for her, not yet. He placed his own hands flat on the ground, palms down, showing her he was there, not a threat. He leaned slightly toward her, careful with space. "Ruby," he said, not loud, not soft, just clear. "It is loud in here." Ruby's scream snagged, not stopping but catching as if her throat had bumped into a word. Ethan kept his voice steady. "Do you hear the rain?" Ruby's fingers pressed harder into her ears, but her head tilted a fraction, searching for what he meant. Rain was constant, a soft tapping above the chaos, barely there. "It is on the roof," Ethan said. "Tap, tap, like this." He lifted one hand and tapped two fingers on the marble, slow and even. Tap, tap, tap. Ruby's scream thinned into a sound that was more breath than noise. Her shoulders still shook, but her mouth closed for 1 second, like her body was trying to decide if it was safe enough to change gears. Vivian's chest rose, then held. Ethan did not touch Ruby's wrist. He did not try to pry her hands away. He spoke into the space between her and the world, making that space smaller. "May I play you a song?" he asked. Ruby's breath hitched. Her hands loosened. One finger slid away from her ear. Her face turned toward Ethan's voice, eyes unfocused, searching by sound. Ethan held out his hand palm up and kept it still. He waited, giving her time to choose. Ruby's hand came out in a jerky movement. Fingers splayed like she was reaching for a railing in the dark. She touched Ethan's palm, then grabbed it tight. Her skin was hot. Her grip was desperate. Ethan's throat bobbed. He nodded once, as if nodding made it more real. "Okay," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Okay." He shifted to stand, and Ruby pulled with him. Vivian rose too, staying close, but she did not take Ruby's hand away. Her fingers curled into her own palm instead, nails biting skin. Ethan guided Ruby slowly. He spoke as they moved, not a stream of reassurance, just simple anchors. "One step," he said. "Good, there is the rug, feel it." Ruby's shoe brushed the edge of a thick patterned runner. Her body shuddered, then steadied. The rug absorbed some of the sound. The marble glare softened underfoot. Ethan's eyes lifted. The grand piano sat on a low platform near the auction area, glossy black lid propped open like a mouth. It had been ignored all evening, a symbol more than an instrument. He led Ruby to the bench. He helped her sit, one hand on the back of the bench, the other still in hers. Ruby did not let go. Vivian stood a few feet away, frozen. Marla hovered behind her, whispering something Vivian did not hear. Dr. Klein stepped back, lips pressed together, watching. Ethan sat beside Ruby. The bench creaked, a small sound that felt too loud in the sudden hush. The room had gone quiet in that eerie way crowds do when they smell a story. Ethan stared at the keys, white and black, smooth, familiar, a bright strip of reality he had avoided for years. His hands hovered above them and shook so badly he had to press his wrists against his thighs for a second. Ruby's fingers found his forearm. She traced the fabric of his sleeve, then stopped holding him like she was holding a rope. "You can feel it," Ethan murmured, and he did not know who he was talking to. "You can feel the sound." Vivian's mouth parted, as if she wanted to say something, but she did not. Ethan lifted his hands again. He placed his right index finger on a single key and pressed. A clear note rang out, bright and clean, cutting through the room and sliding up into the glass ceiling. It hung there, then faded into the rain. Ruby's shoulders dropped by a fraction. Ethan took a breath. His fingers began to move. The melody was simple, a lullaby shape, not a performance piece meant to impress. It moved in small steps, like a hand smoothing a child's hair. The left hand held a slow pulse underneath, steady as the rain, while the right hand carried a line that rose and fell like breath. Ethan's face stayed angled down, but his eyes were not on the keys anymore. They were on something inside him that he was not naming. His jaw tightened once. His throat worked as he swallowed. Ruby leaned forward. Her palm slid along the edge of the bench, then onto the piano's side panel. She pressed her hand against the wood, and her mouth opened in a sound that was not a scream, a small, surprised exhale. The notes wrapped around her. The room did not get quieter, but it stopped being sharp. The music gave the noise somewhere to go. Ruby's breathing slowed. Her hands left her ears. They hovered in front of her face for a moment, unsure what to do with themselves. Then one hand settled on the bench, the other stayed on Ethan's sleeve. Vivian brought one hand to her mouth. Her eyes shone, and she did not blink. A tear slid down her cheek and broke against her lip. She did not wipe it away. Phones were recording now, but the glow of screens felt distant, like fireflies at the edge of a field. Even the bartenders had stopped pouring. Ethan kept playing. The melody circled back on itself, softer, then built again, not louder, just fuller. His shoulders loosened by degrees, as if the music was unwinding knots he had tied too tight. Ruby's face shifted. The strain in her brow eased. Her lips trembled, then formed a small, stunned smile. When Ethan reached the final phrase, his hands slowed. The last notes fell like drops into still water. He let the final chord linger, then lifted his fingers. Silence landed. In that silence, Ruby laughed. Not loud, just a burst of pure sound, startled and bright, like she had found something she did not know was missing. She turned her face toward Ethan and threw both arms around him. Ethan's body locked for a second. Then his arms came up around her, careful, sure. He held her eyes closed, as if the weight of a child against his chest was both unbearable and necessary. "It feels like flying," Ruby whispered into his shoulder. Vivian exhaled a sound that was half sob, half breath. She dropped back to her knees again, not caring about the dress, not caring who saw. Her hands went to Ruby's back, then to Ethan's sleeve, as if she needed proof of both. Applause started and grew fast, loud enough to rattle the glass. People stood. Someone shouted bravo, and the words sounded wrong in the middle of all this, too polished, too late. Ethan did not look up at the crowd. He pulled back from Ruby's hug and tried to smile. It came out crooked. Ruby's hands rose to his face. Her fingertips touched his cheekbones, the line of his nose, the corner of his mouth. She mapped him with gentle certainty. "You are the music man," she said matter of fact. Ethan's eyes flicked to Vivian. Vivian's lips parted again, and her voice came out smaller than anyone in the room had ever heard it. "How did you do that?" she asked. Ethan looked down at Ruby's hand still resting on his. "I listened," he said. Ruby squeezed his fingers, and Ethan felt the squeeze travel up his arm like an electric pulse. He stood carefully easing his hand from hers, a little at a time. Ruby resisted, then let him go when he whispered, "Just a second." He stepped back from the piano bench. The applause continued, but it was already changing, turning into chatter, turning into people reclaiming their night. Ethan's gaze found the service door across the room. It was still open, a crack hallway light spilling through. His cleaning cart waited where he had abandoned it, a small, lonely thing in a sea of tuxedos. Vivian watched him as if she was trying to memorize the shape of him before he vanished. Rain kept tapping the glass above them, steady and indifferent. Ruby sat at the bench, fingers hovering over the keys, smiling at the air, listening. Vivian watched Ethan drift toward the service door, as if he belonged to it. Gray uniform, wet shoulders, a man shaped to pass through spaces nobody looked at. The hallway light caught his profile for a second, and then he was swallowed by the narrow gap, the door easing shut behind him with a soft click. Ruby stayed on the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys, then pressed one at random. A thin note chimed. She smiled like she could taste it. Vivian lowered herself beside her, careful not to crowd her. The marble still held the cold of winter. Ruby's cheeks were damp, but her breathing had settled into something human again. "Mom?" Ruby asked. "I'm here," Vivian said. Ruby tilted her head toward the air where the music had been. "Is he gone?" Vivian glanced at the door. The sign still read service in block letters, bright red on white. She looked away first, like staring too long would make her feel foolish. "He had to go back to work," Vivian said. Ruby touched the keys again, softer this time, as if she was petting them. "I liked his hands." Vivian blinked. "His hands." "They were quiet," Ruby said, searching for the word. "Not loud, like people." Vivian could hear the room trying to restart. The auctioneer clearing his throat, chairs scooting, people shifting into their familiar roles with relief, eager to pretend nothing had cracked open. Marla appeared at the edge of the platform, lips pulled into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Vivian," she whispered, "we should move Ruby backstage. Cameras are everywhere." Vivian looked at the screens. A cluster of guests held phones chest high, not hiding it now. The glow reflected in their glasses. Someone near the bar mouthed, "Amazing," to no one in particular. Someone else laughed in a thin, brittle way. Vivian's throat tightened. She pressed her palm to Ruby's back, feeling her small spine through velvet. Ruby leaned into her, trusting the pressure. "Give me a minute," Vivian said. Marla's eyes flashed, annoyed, then cautious. "We are already trending." Vivian did not answer. She lifted Ruby gently from the bench. Ruby's shoes scuffed the stage edge and she flinched. Vivian adjusted her grip and kept her voice low. "Count the rain," Vivian murmured, not sure where the phrase came from, only that it felt right. Ruby's mouth opened, then closed, her brow smoothed. "Tap, tap," she whispered, and her thumb found the ridges on her bracelet. Vivian carried her through the crowd. People stepped aside quickly, all politeness and sympathy. Vivian caught fragments. "Poor kid. Did you see the janitor? Was that real? Someone should have stopped him." "No, it worked." Vivian kept her gaze forward. She did not thank anyone. She did not apologize. Her jaw held tight as if words might spill out that she could not take back. Backstage, the air smelled different. Less perfume, more dust cables, coffee. Ruby's breathing stayed steady. Tessa stood with both hands clasped by his pail. "I'm so sorry," Tessa said, eyes shining. "I did everything I could." Vivian shook her head once. "You did," she said. Her voice softened. "You did." Dr. Klein hovered near the curtain. A professional smile stitched on, "Too late." "Sensory overload can be unpredictable in environments like this," she began. Vivian cut her off with a look. "Not cruel, just final." Dr. Klein's words folded back into her mouth. Marla moved closer. "We need to decide how we address this," she said. "We can frame it as a resilience moment, accessibility, a North Star initiative." Vivian stared at her. For a second, she did not recognize Marla as a person, only as a machine that turned pain into headlines. "Not now," Vivian said. Marla's lips pressed thin. She nodded anyway because she knew when Vivian's tone meant the subject was closed. Ruby shifted in Vivian's arms. "Mom, can he play again?" Vivian's chest tightened. She pictured Ethan's hands shaking above the keys, then moving like they had been waiting for permission. She pictured the service door half open, the strip of light. "I don't know," Vivian said. Ruby held still, absorbing the answer. Then she said very quietly, "Can you ask?" Vivian kissed the top of Ruby's head. The curls smelled like shampoo and rain. "I will try," she said, and the words tasted like a promise. The gala finished without Vivian hearing most of it. She stood on stage when she was supposed to. She spoke when the teleprompter told her to. The checks were raised. The applause happened on cue. Her mouth smiled. Her mind kept slipping toward a single note in a glass room. At home later, Ruby fell asleep in her bed with the bunny tucked under her chin. Her face was slack with exhaustion. Vivian stood in the doorway for a long time, watching Ruby's chest rise and fall. The house was too quiet after the pavilion. She could still hear the scream in her own bones. She could still hear the lullaby that had wrapped around it and changed it into something else. When Vivian finally walked into her own bedroom, she did not turn on the overhead lights. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dim glow of the city outside her window. Rain threaded down the glass, steady, patient. Her phone buzzed, messages from board members, a text from Marla with a link, a flood of notifications that made her skin crawl. Vivian tapped the link anyway. A shaky video filled her screen, Ruby on the marble, Dr. Klein kneeling, Vivian frozen in an ice-blue spotlight, then a gray figure pushing through the crowd, the audio distorted with the scream. The camera wobbled as the person recording tried to zoom. Vivian watched Ethan kneel, watched him tap the floor, watched Ruby's head tilt. She watched her own face in the moment she said, "Let him." She watched Ethan sit at the piano bench, hands hovering. The video quality was poor, but she could still see the tremor. She could see the hesitation, then the note, then the music. Vivian replayed the clip 3 times, then 4, then 5. Not because she wanted to relive Ruby's panic, because she could not stop looking at Ethan's hands. They did not move like a hobbyist's hands. They moved with a precision that belonged to years, to discipline, to an identity. She paused the video on a frame where Ethan's right hand lifted. A small scar near his thumb caught the light. The detail felt intimate, wrong to stare at. Vivian stared anyway. Her throat tightened. She set the phone down face up on the mattress as if the screen had weight. She tried to sleep. She could not. At 2 in the morning, she padded downstairs and poured a glass of water she did not drink. At 3, she stood at the kitchen window and watched the rain. At 4, she found herself back on the couch, with the video playing on mute, her eyes doing the listening. At 7, she showered, dressed, and went to the office. Her assistant greeted her with the careful tone people used when they had heard something had happened. Vivian walked past without slowing. The morning meeting blurred. Slides, forecasts, questions. Vivian answered all of them. Her voice did not shake. Her hands did not fidget. She was flawless. Then someone mentioned the gala, and the room shifted. A board member said, "Your speech landed well." Another said, "Your daughter is doing okay," with a look that tried to be kind and still felt like a probe. "She's fine," Vivian said, and the word was a blade. The questions stopped. At noon, Vivian asked her assistant for a list of building contractors. At 12:10, she had the facilities manager on the phone. "I need the name of the maintenance staff who were working the pavilion last night," Vivian said. There was a pause. "Ma'am?" The man who played the piano, Vivian added, and heard how strange it sounded. The facilities manager exhaled. "Oh, that guy." Vivian's fingers tightened on the phone. His name. "Ethan Brooks," the manager said. "He's with Harborline Services, not North Star Payroll. Night maintenance. Quiet. Always on time." "How long has he worked the building?" Vivian asked. 3.5 years, give or take," the manager said. "Why? He didn't break anything, did he?" Vivian looked at the rain streaking her office windows. The city below moved like ants under umbrellas. "No," she said. "He didn't." She hung up and sat still. The name did not solve the mystery. It only gave it edges. By late afternoon, Vivian had Ethan's employee file on her desk. 1 page, basic information, address. Emergency contact listed as none, education blank. Previous jobs listed in short lines, all maintenance, all anonymous. Nothing about music, nothing about a grand piano in a room full of cameras. Vivian read the file again slower. 3.5 years, quiet, always on time. She shut the folder and stood. At 6:45 that evening, the executive hallway was nearly empty. The carpet muffled footsteps. The lights felt too white. Vivian stepped out of the elevator and walked past framed awards toward the service corridor, the one the gala guests never used. She heard a soft rustle ahead, a trash bag being tied, a cartwheel turning. Ethan was there pulling a bin liner from a metal can with practiced efficiency. No audience, no piano, just a man doing a job that kept other people's lives clean. Vivian stopped 3 paces away. "Mr. Brooks," she said. Ethan's head snapped up. For a flicker of a second, she saw something raw in his expression. Recognition, then guardedness, then a blank mask sliding into place. "Ms. Hart," he said, neutral, polite, distant. Vivian held his gaze. "I want to talk." Ethan's eyes dropped to the trash bag in his hands. His fingers tightened. "I'm working." "I cleared it," Vivian said, and immediately regretted how it sounded like a command wrapped in courtesy. Ethan's jaw flexed. "Of course you did." Vivian inhaled, steadying herself. "Coffee," she said softer. 10 minutes, somewhere nearby. Ethan did not answer right away. He looked past her toward the elevator, then toward the service stairwell, weighing escape routes out of habit. 2 blocks, Vivian added. A small place. Ethan's gaze returned to her face. His voice was flat, but there was something under it. 20 minutes, he said. Vivian nodded. "Thank you." Ethan turned back to the bin and finished tying the bag. The knot was neat tight, as if control mattered even here. Vivian walked away before she could say anything else, and make it worse. 20 minutes later, she sat at a corner table in a modest cafe that smelled like espresso and cinnamon. Rain tapped the front window. Her latte cooled untouched. The door chimed. Ethan stepped inside. No uniform now, just a dark shirt and jeans. He scanned the room once, then walked to the counter, ordered black coffee, and paid before Vivian could move. He brought the cup to the table and sat across from her, posture alert shoulders, tight hands wrapped around the paper sleeve, as if it was the only warm thing he trusted. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the rain kept its steady rhythm against the glass. The cafe was warm in a way the pavilion had not been. Here, the heat came from people and ovens and the steady churn of an espresso machine. The air smelled like steamed milk and sugar that had caramelized on metal. A couple at the counter argued gently about pastries. A barista laughed at something a coworker said, then went back to wiping the same spot on the register with the same tired diligence. Vivian kept her hands around her cup without drinking. The porcelain was too hot, at first, then quickly went lukewarm. She watched Ethan over the rim like she was watching a stranger on a screen trying to read micro-expressions that did not want to be read. Ethan's coffee sat untouched. His fingers stayed wrapped around it anyway, as if the cup gave him something to do with his hands. He spoke first. His voice was quiet, almost careful. "How is she?" Vivian blinked. It was not the question she expected. Not, "Who are you?" Not, "Why did you do that?" Just the one thing that mattered. "She fell asleep in 10 minutes, Vivian said. Her voice thinned on the last word, then steadied again. No nightmares. She woke up once and asked for water. That was it. Ethan gave a small nod. His shoulders eased by a fraction, then tightened again like he noticed himself relaxing and corrected it. "She talked about you," Vivian added before she could stop herself. Ethan's eyes flicked up. They were a clear brown that looked darker in this light. He did not smile. He did not ask for more. He waited. "She called you the music man," Vivian said. "She asked if you were gone because she did something wrong." Ethan's jaw moved as if he was grinding his teeth. He looked down into his cup. The coffee's surface was flat unbroken, reflecting the warm bulbs above. "She did nothing wrong," he said. "I know," Vivian replied. The words came out sharper than she meant, like she was trying to convince herself as much as him. "I told her you had to work." Ethan's thumb rubbed the edge of the paper sleeve. Back and forth, back and forth. The motion was small but relentless. Vivian leaned forward slightly. "How did you know what to do?" Ethan's gaze stayed on the cup. "I played." "That is not an answer," Vivian said. He looked up then, and there was something in his eyes that made her hold her breath. Not anger exactly, something like a boundary. "It is the answer I have," he said. Vivian could feel her old instincts rising. The part of her that negotiated contracts and drove outcomes. The part that believed every problem had a lever if you found it. She tried to soften her voice. "You did in 5 minutes what we have been trying to do for years. Therapists, programs, equipment. We rebuilt our life around her needs. I would like to understand why your hands on a piano did more than all of that." Ethan's lips pressed together. "Maybe she likes music." "You played like someone trained," Vivian said, "not like a hobby." His gaze dropped again, and the silence stretched far enough to make the couple at the counter glance toward them. Vivian forced herself not to fill it. Ethan exhaled slow. "Does it matter?" "Yes," Vivian said immediate. Then she corrected herself, slowed down. "It matters to me." Ethan gave a short, humorless sound that was almost a laugh. "That is the problem. Everything matters to you. Everything becomes something you can measure. Vivian held his gaze. The words landed, and they landed true. Her first instinct was to deny it. Her second was to ask herself why denial felt like effort. "My daughter is not a metric," Vivian said quietly. Ethan watched her for a moment. His fingers loosened around the cup, then tightened again. "I know," he said, "but the room last night did not. The room was watching to see if you would fail." Vivian swallowed. She tasted bitterness, and it was not from coffee. "I failed," she said. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. She stopped screaming. Vivian looked down at her hands. A thin crescent of red marked her palm where she had pressed her nails too hard earlier. "I did not stop it," she said. "You did?" Ethan's mouth twitched once, not quite a smile. "She did. She grabbed onto something. I just gave her a sound she could hold." Vivian's grip on her cup tightened. "You make it sound simple." "It was not simple," Ethan said, and his voice changed. Just a shade lower. "It was the opposite." Vivian's pulse kicked. "Then tell me what it was." Ethan stared into his coffee. The cafe sounds swelled between them. Milk being steamed, a chair scraping, rain tapping the window with steady patience. When he spoke again, it was careful. "I do not like being in rooms like that," he said. "People look through you until you are in their way." Vivian flinched, not because she was offended, but because she knew exactly what he meant. She had looked through people too, not with malice, with speed, with focus, with the certainty that the work mattered more than the bodies carrying it. "I did not even know your name," Vivian admitted. Ethan's eyes lifted, and he held her there. "No," he said, "you did not." Vivian reached for something solid, something she could offer that was not just apology shaped as words. "I can compensate you," she said. "For last night." Ethan's gaze went flat. "No. It was a disruption to your job," Vivian tried again. "You took a risk. Security could have thrown you out." Ethan's hands tightened on the cup. "Do not turn it into a transaction." Vivian felt heat crawl up her neck. She hated being corrected in public, even in a cafe, even by a man who a day ago did not exist in her world. "I am not trying to buy you," she said. Ethan looked at her, then really looked. "That is the only language you trust," he said. "Money, power, leverage." Vivian's breath caught. Her instinct was to snap back to slice his words apart with logic. Instead, she sat there and let them sit heavy and unflattering. "You are wrong," she said at last, and even she heard how unconvincing it sounded. Ethan did not push it. He shifted his gaze to the rain at the window as if he could step out of the conversation without leaving his chair. Vivian tried a different angle. "Why did you walk in?" she asked. "You could have stayed behind that door." Ethan's throat moved. He stared at the coffee as if it might answer for him. "I heard her," he said. "That is still not an answer," Vivian replied, softer now. "There were people around her, professionals, staff, me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I heard the kind of scream that means there is no air." Vivian's stomach turned. The words pulled her back to the marble. Ruby's face contorted, hands locked to ears, trapped in a storm no one else could hear. Ethan's voice stayed even, but something in it frayed at the edges. "I do not do well with that sound." Vivian felt the urge to ask why. She held it down, and instead she said, "I am sorry you had to hear it." Ethan looked up quickly like he was surprised by the shape of her sentence. The surprise faded. He gave a small nod and took his first sip of coffee. It was already cooling. He did not seem to care. Vivian's own throat tightened. The confession that had sat behind her teeth for 7 years pushed forward without permission. "My ex-husband left when Ruby was 2, she said. Ethan froze with the cup halfway to his mouth. Vivian kept her eyes on the table. The wood was scratched in small arcs from years of mugs being dragged. She traced one scratch with her fingertip. "He said he could not live like that," Vivian continued. She heard her own voice steady and distant the way she spoke in court filings. "He wanted a normal family. He said Ruby was inconvenient." Ethan's cup lowered slowly. His hand trembled enough that a drop of coffee slid down the lid and onto his thumb. Vivian did not stop. "He had already been seeing someone else," she said. "When I confronted him, he told me he deserved a child who could look at him." Ethan's face hardened. His eyes darkened. Vivian finally looked up. "I do not say that to get sympathy," she said. "I say it because it shaped everything. I turned my life into a system. If I could not fix what was broken then, I would build something that could not be broken." Ethan's mouth closed, then opened again. The words that came out were sharp. "That is unforgivable." Vivian's throat burned. She nodded once, yes. Ethan leaned back in his chair, as if he needed distance from the sentence. His fingers left the cup and flexed once empty air between them. Vivian watched him, and something inside her shifted. She had expected pity, or a polite discomfort, or a quick change of subject. Anger felt strangely clean. "I am sorry," Ethan said, and his voice softened. "For him. Not for you saying it." Vivian's laugh came out thin. "I did not plan to." Ethan stared at the table. "You carry it," he said almost to himself. Vivian did not answer. The cafe noise filled the space again, merciful and ordinary. After a long moment, Vivian spoke. "You said you do not do well with that scream," she said. "Why?" Ethan's eyes lifted to hers, then away. His shoulders rose and fell with a breath that looked practiced, like he had learned how to keep things inside. "I have my reasons," he said. Vivian nodded. She accepted the boundary even though every part of her wanted to push. She let her hands relax around her cup. "I am not asking for your life story," Vivian said. "I am asking for help." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Help how?" Vivian's heart beat once hard. She looked at his hands, at the faint scar near his thumb that she had paused the video on. She thought of Ruby's smile at the piano, the way her shoulders had lowered when the first note rang. Vivian lifted her gaze back to his face. "Would you teach Ruby?" she said, and her voice stayed steady only because she forced it to. "How to play." For a second, Ethan did not move. The cafe sounds kept going around them, cups clinking, steam, hissing, rain tapping the glass, but his face went still, as if he had stepped into a different room. "Teach," he repeated, and the word came out flat. Vivian held her breath. She kept her hands on her cup, so she would not reach across the table and turn this into something physical, something she could control. "Yes," she said, "piano." Ethan's eyes flicked down to his hands. His fingers flexed once slow, like they were testing whether they were still his. Then he set his coffee on the table with care and pushed his chair back. "No," he said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The finality in it made Vivian's throat tighten. Ethan Vivian began, and then she stopped, because using his name felt too familiar. "Mr. Brooks." He was already half standing. "I cannot." Vivian's instincts surged. She felt herself reaching for leverage, for arguments, for numbers that could make the world bend. She caught herself and swallowed it down. Last night, she said, choosing each word, Ruby finally looked like she was not trapped inside her own skin. Ethan's jaw tensed. He kept his gaze on the table edge, not on her. "I am glad," he said, and the sentence sounded like it cost him something. "But no." Vivian leaned forward. "Tell me why." Ethan's laugh was short and sharp. He did not look amused, because it was not nothing he said. "You think I sat at that piano and felt fine afterward?" Vivian did not answer. She watched his throat work as he swallowed. Ethan stood fully. His chair scraped the floor. The couple at the counter looked over again. Ethan's shoulders rose, then dropped, as if he realized he was drawing attention and hated it. "I should go," he said. Vivian's hand lifted an inch off her cup, then stopped hovering. "Please sit," she said. Not a command, not a negotiation, just a request. Ethan stayed standing. Vivian tried again, softer. "I am not asking you to perform. I am not asking you to go back on a stage. I am asking you to help a child who trusts you." Ethan's eyes finally met hers. The look was not cold, it was worn. "You do not understand what you are asking," he said. "Then make me understand," Vivian replied. Ethan's gaze dropped again. His breathing went shallow, quick. He looked toward the door like it was a life raft. Vivian felt the urge to talk faster, to fill the space with logic, to keep him from leaving. She forced herself to do the opposite. She went quiet and let the silence hold him. Ethan sat back down slowly, like he was lowering himself onto ice. He wrapped his hands around his cup again. His knuckles were pale. "I used to play," he said. Vivian kept her face neutral. Inside, something in her clicked into place like a puzzle piece finally turning the right way. "Professionally?" she asked. Ethan's mouth tightened. "Yes." Vivian let that sit between them. The word explained the precision, the way the notes had arrived, like they had been waiting in his bones. "You were trained," she said. Ethan nodded once sharp. "A long time ago." Where Vivian asked. Ethan flinched. It was small, but it was there. Vivian corrected herself. "You do not have to tell me." His eyes stayed on the coffee lid. "It does not matter." "It matters if it means you know how to teach," Vivian said. "It matters if it means you understand the discipline, the patience. Ruby needs someone who can translate the world into something she can hold." Ethan's thumb rubbed the paper sleeve again, back and forth, back and forth. Vivian watched the motion and remembered how Ruby rubbed her ridged bracelet. Two people trying to carve a groove into chaos. "Ruby is not a project," Ethan said quietly. "No," Vivian said at once. "She is my daughter." Ethan's eyes lifted. "Then do not talk about her like a problem to solve." Vivian felt the sting because it was accurate. She swallowed. "I have been trying to solve her," she admitted. I have been trying to fix the parts of her that make other people uncomfortable. Ethan's gaze softened a fraction, then hardened again like he did not trust softness. Vivian leaned in a little more. When you played, she said you did not treat her like a defect. You treated her like a person who needed a different door. Ethan's grip tightened. I played a song, he said. And she came back to me, Vivian replied. Ethan's eyes closed for a moment. When he opened them, the brown looked glassy, but he did not let anything fall. You want me to teach her every week, he said. You want me to walk into your home and sit at a piano and do that over and over. Vivian nodded once. If you can. Ethan shook his head. I cannot. Vivian's chest ached. Because it hurts, she said. Ethan's lips parted. He stared at her like she had reached too close. It is not just pain, he said. It is a door I nailed shut. Vivian held his gaze. What is behind it? Ethan's breath hitched. He looked down fast as if the question had a physical weight. I had a boy, he said. The words were quiet, almost swallowed. The cafe sounds seemed to shift, as if even the espresso machine lowered its hiss. Vivian did not move. She did not reach across the table. She kept her hands around her cup and let him have the space. Ethan's jaw worked. His name was Miles. Vivian's voice came out in a whisper, had. Ethan's eyes stayed on the table. His hands tightened until the paper sleeve crumpled. He was 5, Ethan said. He died. Vivian's throat closed. She forced air in, slow, careful. I am sorry, she said, and it sounded too small. Ethan's head snapped up. Do not, he said, sharper than before. Vivian nodded. She respected the boundary even though her chest wanted to split open with the impulse to comfort. Ethan looked away toward the rain. His voice dropped. It was a lake, he said. A stupid, ordinary day. He wanted to skip stones. He wanted me to watch. His fingers trembled. He pressed them flat to the table as if he could pin them down. Vivian waited. Ethan swallowed hard. That night, he said, and his voice broke on the edges, he asked me to play. The song. The one I played for Ruby. Vivian's heart thudded. She saw Ethan's hands on the keys again, the way his shoulders had loosened, as the melody moved through him. He asked, Ethan continued. And I said in a minute, I said I was tired. Vivian felt the words land like a stone sinking into water. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on something far away. There was no minute, he whispered. There was no later. There was just the empty space where he should have been. His breath came faster. He pressed his lips together, trying to lock the rest inside. Vivian's voice shook. Ethan. Ethan flinched at his name again, then steadied himself, shoulders rising and falling, as if he was fighting for oxygen. And last night, he said, I heard your daughter scream, and it was the same kind of sound. I could not stay behind the door. I played because I did not want to be too late again. Vivian's eyes stung. She blinked hard and kept her face still. Ethan's voice dropped lower. Teaching Ruby means promises, he said. It means she will wait for me. It means she will trust that I will come back. Vivian swallowed. Yes. Ethan's gaze snapped to hers. And if I cannot, he asked. If I wake up one day and the music feels like knives and I disappear, then she is sitting in the dark wondering why she was not enough. Vivian's throat tightened. She could see at Ruby's small hands on keys listening for an echo that would not return. Vivian set her cup down. Her fingers were shaking. She already wonders, Vivian said quietly. Ethan's face tightened. Do not. Vivian forced herself to keep going because the truth was the only thing she had that did not feel like leverage. She asked if you left because she did something wrong, Vivian said. And this morning I found her at the piano in our living room. Ethan went still. She was not playing, Vivian continued. She was just sitting, her hands on the keys. She said she was trying to remember exactly how it felt. Ethan's breath caught. His eyes reddened at the rims. She said, Vivian added, and her voice cracked that the music made her feel like the dark was not empty. Ethan's hands clenched. The lid on his cup rattled. He stared down at it like he could hold the shaking in. Stop, he whispered. Vivian's eyes filled, but she did not wipe them. I do not know how to give her that, she said. I do not know how to be what she needs in that moment. You were. Ethan closed his eyes. His shoulders trembled once. He opened them again and looked at Vivian with something raw and furious and scared. You think that makes it easier, he asked. Vivian shook her head. No, she said. I think it makes it true. Ethan stared at her for a long time. The rain kept tapping the glass. The barista called a name for an order. Someone laughed near the door. Life kept moving around them indifferent. Finally, Ethan spoke and his voice was thin. One lesson, he said. Vivian's breath stuttered. She did not let herself smile. One she repeated careful. Ethan nodded. 1. And if I cannot do more after that, you tell her the truth, he said. You tell her it is not because of her. You tell her she did nothing wrong. Vivian's eyes burned. "I promise," she said. Ethan's jaw tightened again, but some of the fight drained from his shoulders. He stood up, movements rigid, and set his coffee cup in the trash slot by the table without looking at it. Vivian stood too, not wanting him to feel cornered as he left. Ethan paused with his hand on the door. He did not turn around. His voice came out rough. "She is not broken," he said. "She is just trying to live in a world that does not listen." Then he pulled the door open and stepped into the rain. Vivian stood there a moment longer, watching the wet street through the cafe window. Her latte sat untouched, a pale swirl cooling in silence. When she finally walked out, the rain hit her face cold and clean. She did not raise her umbrella right away. She let the water soak into her hairline, into her sleeves, as if she needed proof that the night at the pavilion had been real. At home, she moved quietly through the living room. The piano stood against the far wall, glossy and new, its lid closed. Ruby was curled on the couch, with Mr. Patches tucked under her arm, asleep in a tangle of blanket and curls. Vivian stood near the piano and rested her fingertips on the closed lid. The wood was smooth, cool. She listened to the rain on the windows and to her daughter's breathing, and her hands kept trembling, even when she tried to make them stop. Saturday arrived with the same rain, softer now, more like a patient tapping than a storm. Vivian woke before her alarm and lay still listening to it on the glass. Ruby was already awake. Vivian could hear her moving in her room, small feet on the rug, a drawer opening, the light click of a bracelet against a nightstand. "Is it today?" Ruby called down the hall. Vivian swung her legs out of bed. "It is today." Ruby appeared in the doorway a minute later, hair damp from a rushed wash, curls springing in every direction. She had chosen leggings and a loose sweatshirt because the fabric did not pinch. Mr. Patches was tucked under one arm, like he was going on an adventure too. Vivian knelt and smoothed Ruby's sleeve. "We are going to be polite," she said. Ruby's mouth twitched. "I will be polite." Vivian pressed a kiss to her forehead. "If it feels loud in your body, you tell me." Ruby rubbed the ridges on her bracelet. "I will tell you." The penthouse was quiet in the way expensive spaces could be. Sound did not bounce here. It settled. Thick rugs softened footsteps. The furniture sat like it was posing, all clean lines and pale wood. The floor-to-ceiling windows made the rain look close enough to touch. But the apartment was not a museum. Vivian had made sure of that. A low railing ran along the hallway at child height, smooth and continuous, guiding Ruby's hand from bedroom to kitchen to living room. A corner shelf held baskets of textured objects Ruby used to ground herself. A small set of wind chimes hung near a window, not for decoration, but for orientation when the air moved. The upright piano stood against the far wall of the living room. It was new enough that the black finish still smelled faintly of varnish. Vivian had not said that out loud to anyone. The delivery men had rolled it in while Ruby was at school, and Vivian had stood there with her arms folded, watching the wheels cross her rug, feeling the strange mix of hope and shame in her chest. At 12:45, the intercom buzzed. Vivian's stomach tightened. She pressed the button. Yes. A voice came through, rough and careful. "It is Ethan." Ruby's head snapped toward the speaker. Her face lit up. "Music, man." Vivian kept her own voice level. "Send him up." The elevator opened into the foyer, and Ethan stepped out holding nothing but a folded cloth bag. No uniform. Dark shirt, jeans, a simple jacket damp at the collar. He looked out of place, and he knew it. His gaze did a quick scan of the room the way he had scanned the pavilion, but here the scan was for exits and distances, not for investors. "You are early," Vivian said. "Support." "I like early," Ethan replied. Ruby did not wait for introductions. She followed the hallway rail at a near run, then launched herself toward the sound of Ethan's shoes. Her arms wrapped around his waist with sudden force. Ethan went still. His hands hovered in the air for a beat too long. Vivian watched his face. Something passed through it fast, like a flash of light underwater. Then his arms came down gentle and steady, and he returned the hug. "Hi, Ruby," he said. Ruby pressed her cheek against his shirt. "You came back." "I did," Ethan answered. Vivian cleared her throat more for herself than for them. "Thank you for coming," she said. Ethan released Ruby carefully. One lesson he reminded Vivian, not unkind but firm. "I remember," Vivian said. Her fingers curled into her palm. "Come in." Ruby took Ethan's hand and guided him with all the authority of a host. "The piano is here," she said, tugging him toward the living room. "It is shiny." Ethan let her lead. He stopped a step away from the upright piano and stared at it as if it might speak first. The rain moved in slow streaks behind the windows. Vivian stood near the doorway, arms loose at her sides, forcing herself not to manage the room with her body. Ethan set his cloth bag on the bench and opened it. Inside were small items, ordinary things that looked strange against the polished black. A roll of soft fabric tape, a few thin textured stickers, a small metronome that fit in his palm. Ruby reached toward the bag, curious. Ethan shifted it slightly so her fingers could find the items. "What is that?" Ruby asked, touching the tape. "Something to help your hands remember where they are," Ethan said. Ruby lifted her chin. "My hands remember lots." "I can tell," Ethan replied, and there was a hint of warmth in his voice. He sat at the bench and turned slightly toward Ruby. "Before we play anything, I want you to meet the keyboard," he said. Ruby wrinkled her nose. "Meet it." Ethan took her right hand and placed it gently on the keys. He did not force her fingers into positions. He let her rest her palm on the smooth surface. Ruby's shoulders lowered. She pressed one key with her index finger. A note chimed. Ruby smiled. "That one is small." Ethan nodded. "It is. Now this." He guided her hand 2 keys to the right. "Press." Ruby pressed. The note was higher. "That one is smaller," Ruby said, "please." Ethan's mouth twitched. "Good. Now press this one." He guided her to a lower note. Ruby pressed. The note was deeper, rounder. Ruby's head tilted. "That one is big." Ethan exhaled softly through his nose, almost a laugh. "Exactly. The piano is full of big and small. You do not need to see it. You can feel it." He tore off a short strip of fabric tape and placed it on one key, then another. The tape did not look like much, but under Ruby's fingers, it was a landmark. "These are home," Ethan said. "When you get lost, you come back to home." Ruby traced the tape with careful fingertips. "Home," she repeated. Vivian felt something tighten behind her ribs. She looked away toward the rain so Ruby would not hear it in her breathing. Ethan placed Ruby's left hand on the lower keys and her right hand on the middle. "We are going to tell a story with 2 hands," he said. "Left hand is the ground, right hand is the voice." Ruby frowned. "Stories have words." "Some stories have notes instead," Ethan said. "Notes can do what words cannot." Ruby considered that. "What story are we telling?" Ethan listened for a moment, not to the room but to Ruby. "A story called Rain and Light," he said. Ruby smiled like that was the best title she had ever heard. Ethan turned the small metronome in his palm and started it without sound, just watching the pendulum swing. Then he tapped the bench lightly, with 2 fingers matching the rain on the windows. "Tap tap," Ruby whispered. "Yes," Ethan said. "That is our pulse. You do not rush it. You do not fight it. You ride it." Ruby sat up straighter. Ethan guided Ruby's left hand to press a single note on the pulse. Tap, tap, tap. Her finger pressed at the wrong time, at first, early, then late. Ethan did not correct her with words. He tapped again steady and Ruby adjusted. Vivian watched Ruby's face change. The concentration was intense, but it was not panic. Ruby was working inside a structure that made sense. "Good," Ethan said quietly. "Now your right hand. 1 note at a time." He guided her fingers through 3 notes. Ruby pressed them clumsy at first, then smoother. The sound was simple, almost childish, but it carried a shape. It started to feel like a sentence. Ruby's smile returned. "It is talking." "It is," Ethan said. Vivian could not help herself. "How are you doing this without sheet music?" she asked. Ethan did not look up. "Sheet music is a map," he said. "Ruby does not need a map. She needs landmarks and rhythm." Ruby lifted her hands off the keys and held them in the air like she was holding something invisible. "Again," she said. Ethan nodded. "Again." They repeated the pattern until Ruby's left hand found the pulse on its own. Tap, tap, tap. Then the right hand added the little line above it. Rain and light, ground and voice. When Ruby missed a note, she froze, breath caught. Ethan did not jump in. He kept the pulse with a soft tap on the bench. Ruby's shoulders lowered. She found home by touch, the fabric tape under her finger. Then she started again. Vivian felt her own throat tighten. She did not move. She did not speak. She watched Ruby recover without being rescued, and it felt like watching a door open. After nearly an hour, Ethan lifted his hands. "That is enough for today," he said. Ruby made a small sound of protest. "But I am not done." "You are not done," Ethan agreed. "You are also tired." Ruby frowned, then pressed a hand to her chest like she was checking. "Maybe a little." Ethan stood from the bench and stepped back, giving Ruby the space to sit with the piano without him. Vivian moved closer, not crowding, just near enough that Ruby could reach if she wanted. Ethan picked up his cloth bag, motions efficient and restrained. He looked like a man preparing to leave before he forgot how. Ruby turned her head toward him. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Ethan paused. "Yes." Ruby's fingers rested on the keys without pressing them. "When you play," she said slowly, "it sounds like you are talking to someone you love." Vivian's breath caught. She did not know how Ruby could hear that, but Ruby always heard what mattered. Ruby's head tilted. "Can you hear them when you play?" Ethan's hand tightened on the strap of his bag. For a long moment, he did not answer. The rain kept tapping the windows. The apartment held its quiet. Then Ethan's voice came out low. "Yes," he said, "I can." Ruby nodded, as if the answer fit into a place she already had ready. "That is why it is sad and pretty," at the same time she said. Ethan swallowed. His eyes shone, but he kept his face still. Ruby's mouth softened into a small smile. "I am glad you can still talk," she said, "even if it hurts." Ethan stood very still, like any movement might break him. Ruby lifted her hands, searching. Vivian guided Ruby's fingers lightly toward Ethan's sleeve. Ruby found him and held on, not gripping hard this time, just holding. Ethan's shoulders eased a fraction. "Are you leaving now?" Ruby asked. Ethan looked at Vivian, a quick glance that carried a question he did not speak. Vivian did not answer for him. She stayed still and let the room belong to them. Ethan looked back to Ruby. "Yes," he said, honest. "For today." Ruby nodded again. "Okay," she said. She pressed one key softly, a small note. Tap, tap. Ethan's throat worked. Tap, tap, he echoed. He stepped toward the door slower than he had arrived. Vivian walked him to the foyer. Neither of them spoke until the elevator doors opened. Ethan faced the hallway for a second, then turned his head slightly toward Vivian. "She learns fast," he said. Vivian's voice came out quiet. "She has been waiting." Ethan's gaze dropped. "So have I," he said, and then he looked away as if he regretted saying anything at all. The elevator doors closed. Vivian stood alone in the foyer until the soft hum of the elevator disappeared. In the living room, Ruby sat at the piano bench with both hands on the keys. She did not play the melody. She just pressed the taped key once, listening to the note as it faded into the rain. Ruby pressed the taped key again and listened until the sound turned into nothing. She did it a third time softer, like she was afraid the note might break if she asked too much of it. Vivian sat on the edge of the couch and watched her daughter's shoulders rise and fall. The apartment felt different after Ethan left, not emptier, sharper, like the air had been rearranged. Ruby kept one finger on the tape. "Home," she said mostly to herself. "Yes," Vivian replied. Ruby's head turned toward the windows. The rain was still there, a steady tap against glass. Tap, tap, Ruby whispered, then pressed the key once more, matching the rhythm she had learned with her own small timing. Vivian thought of the way Ethan had tapped the marble at the pavilion. 2 fingers. Even. Patient. She had a sudden vivid memory of how his hands had hovered above the keys, like they were afraid of what they could wake up. Her phone buzzed with an email thread from Marla about an accessibility statement and a list of media requests. Vivian put the phone face down on the coffee table and did not pick it up again. On Monday, Ruby walked into the kitchen after breakfast and asked, "Is it Saturday yet?" Vivian looked up from her laptop. "No." Ruby frowned. "How many sleeps?" 5, Vivian said. Ruby considered. "Too many." Vivian wanted to laugh. She did not. She reached across the counter and touched Ruby's wrist just above the ridged bracelet. Ruby leaned into the touch. The next Saturday, Ethan arrived early again. The intercom buzzed at 12:43. Vivian was in the kitchen rinsing blueberries. The sound made her heartbeat stutter. Ruby was already halfway down the hall, hands skimming the rail. "It is him," she said with certainty. Vivian pressed the button. "Come up." Ethan stepped out of the elevator with damp hair and the same cloth bag. He kept his gaze low until Ruby reached him. Ruby hugged him without hesitation this time, like they had agreed on the shape of it. Ethan returned the hug quickly, then loosened his arms, first careful. "Hi," he said. Ruby stepped back. "I practiced," she announced. Ethan's eyebrows lifted. "Did you?" Ruby nodded hard. Tap, tap. Ethan's mouth twitched. "Show me." The lesson began the same way each time, with landmarks, with rhythm. Ethan added a second strip of tape, then a third. Ruby learned to find them without thinking, her fingers moving with a confidence that made Vivian's throat tighten. When Ruby made a mistake, she froze less. She learned to come back to home. She learned to start again without asking permission. Ethan rarely praised with big words. He used small ones. "Good. Yes. There." The calm in his voice did more than compliments ever had. After the third Saturday, Vivian stood near the foyer as Ethan gathered his bag. She heard herself speak before she could stop it. "Would you like coffee?" she asked. "Before you go." Ethan paused. His eyes flicked toward the living room, where Ruby sat at the piano bench tapping a single note in time with the rain. Then he looked back at Vivian. "I should head out," he said. Vivian nodded too quickly. "Of course." Ethan hesitated, then added another time. Vivian watched him leave and felt both relief and irritation because she could not tell which part of her wanted him gone and which part wanted him to stay. By the fifth Saturday, Ruby had a short piece that sounded like something real, not just notes in a row, a shape, a beginning and an end. Ethan called it Rain and Light, and Ruby said the light part was her favorite because it felt warm on her hands. Vivian learned to set the room before Ethan arrived. Curtains open, bench centered, tape strips checked. She stopped scheduling phone calls during the hour, even calls she used to treat as urgent. The world could wait. Ruby could not. Ethan noticed everything. He did not comment on the art on the wall or the view or the cost of the piano. He noticed the child height rail, the basket of textured objects. The way Vivian kept the kitchen light lower on lesson days because Ruby's hearing seemed sharper when the room was not bright. One Saturday, Ethan stepped into the living room and said almost casually, "You changed the rug." Vivian blinked. She had replaced the runner with a thicker one, darker, softer underfoot. Ruby said the old one sounded loud, Vivian replied. Ethan nodded once like that was the right answer. Ruby, hearing her name, lifted her head and smiled. After the sixth lesson, Vivian asked again about coffee. Ethan's answer came slower. 5 minutes, he said, as if he was bargaining with himself. Vivian poured black coffee because she remembered he had ordered it that way. She did not offer sugar. She set the mug down and waited. Ruby stayed at the piano and practiced the left-hand pulse on her own, a steady tap that made the room feel anchored. Ethan stood in the kitchen mug in hand eyes on Ruby from the corner of his vision. "She likes the low notes," Ethan said. "She says they feel big," Vivian replied. Ethan's gaze softened. She is right. Vivian watched him watch Ruby. There was something there that was not just teaching, a gentleness that looked like restraint, like he was holding himself back from feeling too much. Vivian kept her voice light. "How long did it take you to learn?" Ethan's shoulders tightened. "A long time." Vivian nodded, taking the answer he was willing to give. "Ruby thinks the keys are talking," she said. Ethan's mouth twitched again. "They are." Ruby called from the bench, "Mom, he says the piano tells stories." Vivian raised her voice slightly. "He does." Ruby beamed and went back to the pulse, proud to own the information. Ethan finished his coffee in 3 sips and set the mug in the sink as if he did not want to leave evidence of himself. Then he cleared his throat. "See you next week," he said, a statement, not a question. Ruby lifted one hand in the air like she was waving at sound. Yes. After that, coffee became routine, not every week, often enough that Vivian stopped offering it like a trap and started offering it like a courtesy. Sometimes Ethan stayed only long enough to drink. Sometimes he left quickly, as if the apartment's quiet made him nervous. Once when Ruby had a cold and her fingers were clumsy, Ethan stayed an extra 10 minutes to show Vivian how to guide Ruby's hands without grabbing. Vivian watched his hands close around Ruby's with a softness that felt practiced, then watched him flinch when Ruby giggled and said, "That tickles." It was a small laugh, but it landed on Ethan like a weight. His face went still. He stepped back too fast, then recovered, smoothing his expression into calm. Vivian pretended she did not notice. She poured him another half cup of coffee and changed the subject to Ruby's school schedule. Weeks moved in steady increments. Rain softened into mist. Then rain returned again because Seattle never truly let it go. Ruby's piece grew longer. Ethan added two-handed coordination. Vivian started hearing Ruby practice before breakfast, small notes drifting down the hall like a child talking in her sleep. One evening after a lesson that ran long because Ruby would not stop asking again, Vivian glanced at the clock and said, "You have been here an hour and a half." Ethan looked startled, as if time had slipped past him without permission. "She was focused," he said, defensive. "She was," Vivian agreed. She hesitated. "Do you want to eat?" Ethan blinked. "No." Vivian nodded and kept her tone even. "It is just takeout, nothing complicated." Ethan's gaze flicked toward Ruby. Ruby was at the bench, tapping the taped keys softly, not playing the whole piece, just the part she liked, the light part. Ethan's jaw worked. He looked back at Vivian. "I should go." Vivian did not argue. She simply said, "Okay." Ruby turned her head. "You are leaving," she said, not accusing, just noticing. Ethan's shoulders tightened. "Yes," he replied, "for today." Ruby's fingers found the tape. "Home," she said, then added, "You come back?" Ethan went still. His mouth opened, then closed. Vivian watched him swallow. The air between them held its breath. "I come back," Ethan said finally. Ruby smiled like that settled everything. They ate takeout without Ethan that night. Vivian and Ruby sat at the kitchen island, cardboard containers between them, the rain tapping the windows. Ruby hummed the melody under her breath between bites, and Vivian listened to her daughter fill the quiet with something that was not fear. The next Saturday, Ethan arrived at 12:41. Ruby hugged him. Ethan returned it for a second longer than usual. When the lesson ended, Vivian did not offer coffee. She did not offer dinner. She simply walked him to the foyer. Ethan paused at the elevator as the doors opened. He looked at Vivian with a guarded expression, then said very softly, "She is brave." Vivian's voice caught. "She is." Ethan nodded once, stepped into the elevator, then turned slightly before the doors closed. "And so are you," he said. The doors slid shut. Vivian stood alone for a moment, palms damp, listening to the faint hum fade away. In the living room, Ruby pressed the taped key and let the note ring steady as rain. Ruby pressed the taped key and let the note ring until it melted into the rain. Ethan stopped flinching at that sound. Not all at once, not dramatically. It happened the way rust gives up one careful day at a time. By spring, Ruby's fingers no longer searched for home like it was a rescue rope. She found it like it belonged to her. She learned to keep a pulse under her right-hand melody, even when the melody stumbled. Ethan called it staying on the ground. Ruby called it not falling. Vivian started leaving her office earlier on Saturdays without announcing it to anyone. She stopped apologizing for it in her head. The lesson hour became a fixed point in her week, not a break, not a soft spot, a priority. Ethan began staying long enough after lessons to watch Ruby practice the part that made her grin, the light part. He stood with his hands in his pockets, shoulders tense, eyes on the keys as if they could still bite. Vivian learned not to fill that silence. She would set a plate of fruit on the counter and walk away letting the quiet exist without turning it into an interview. One evening, Ruby played her short piece twice, then said, "Mom, sit. Ethan, sit." She patted the couch like she owned the room. Ethan hesitated. Vivian sat first. Ethan sat at the far end, perched like he might spring up and leave if the cushions pulled him under. Ruby turned on the bench and faced them by sound. "Do you like it?" she asked. Vivian kept her voice steady. "I love it." Ruby turned her head toward Ethan. "Do you love it?" Ethan's mouth opened. He closed it again. "I do," he said finally. Ruby nodded, satisfied, then swiveled back to the keys and played the piece once more, louder this time, like she was painting over old fear with new sound. At the end of May, Marla called Vivian with a crisp tone that meant a new storm was forming. "We are back at the pavilion for giving night," Marla said. "Same venue, same donors. The board wants you front and center." Vivian looked out her office window at a gray sky. "Fine." Marla continued, "They also want an angle. Last year became a story whether we liked it or not. Accessibility, the scholarship fund, community programs. They want to show progress." Vivian did not speak. Marla softened her voice a notch. "Do you want me to handle press boundaries around Ruby?" "Yes," Vivian said. "No phones near her." "Done," Marla replied. Then carefully, "Do you want to include the teacher?" Vivian's fingers curled around a pen. "Ethan is not a prop." "I know," Marla said. "But donors remember him. They ask. I am asking you what you want." Vivian's throat tightened on the word want. "I want Ruby safe," she said. Marla breathed out. "Okay." That Saturday, Vivian mentioned giving night, while Ruby washed her hands at the kitchen sink, fingers sliding through soap the way she liked, slow and thorough. "It is the big party again," Vivian said. Ruby turned her head. "The loud place." "Yes," Vivian said, "the loud place." Ruby's mouth tightened for a moment. Then she rubbed the ridges on her bracelet. "Is Ethan going?" Vivian paused. "I do not know. You can ask him." Ruby did not hesitate. When Ethan arrived, Ruby hugged him, then stepped back and said, "We are going to the loud place." Ethan's shoulders stiffened. "We are." Ruby nodded, like it was already settled. "We can play." Ethan's gaze flicked to Vivian. Vivian kept her face neutral, but her pulse kicked. "We do not have to," Vivian said quickly, and then she stopped hearing her own fear in the sentence. Ruby shook her head. "I want to." Ethan crouched to Ruby's level voice, calm. "Why?" Ruby considered. "Because last time I could not breathe," she said. "And then I could. I want to do the could part there." Ethan's jaw worked. He looked away for a second, then back. "Okay," he said, and it sounded like he was agreeing to something bigger than a song. They rehearsed in the living room, not endlessly, not until Ruby's hands ached. Ethan kept it clean and simple. He taught Ruby how to recover from a wrong note without stopping, how to listen for the ground pulse even when the air felt too full. Vivian watched from the doorway, hands clasped, trying not to control the room with her worry. On the day of giving night, the rain returned like a familiar knock. Vivian dressed in a silver gown that caught light without shouting for it. She pulled her hair back, then let a few strands fall loose. It made her feel less armored, which made her stomach tighten. She did it anyway. Ruby wore a dark green dress with a soft lining. She insisted on her bracelet. Vivian did not argue. Ethan arrived in a simple suit that did not quite fit his shoulders like the fabric belonged to a different life. In the car, Ruby sat in the back and tapped her fingers on her knee. Tap, 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 tap. Her pulse. Her home. Vivian reached back and found Ruby's hand. Ruby squeezed twice. "I am here," Vivian said. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, quiet eyes on the wet streets. At a red light, his fingers tapped once against his thigh, then stopped, as if he had caught himself doing it. The pavilion glowed warm against the rain glass lit from within. When they stepped inside, the noise hit them softer than last year, but still sharp. Vivian felt Ruby's hand tighten in hers. Ethan leaned slightly toward Ruby. "Find the rain," he murmured. Ruby tilted her head. Her mouth softened. "Tap, tap," she whispered, and her shoulders lowered. Backstage smelled like cords and metal and coffee again. Ruby stood near the curtain, with her cane tucked under one arm. She wore a small smile that looked brave and brittle at the same time. Vivian crouched and adjusted Ruby's sleeve. "You do not have to," she said, voice low. Ruby lifted her chin. "I want to." Ethan stood beside them, hands clasped in front of him, like he was holding something invisible together. Ruby reached for his sleeve and found it without help. She held it lightly. "Are you right there?" Ruby asked. Ethan answered without hesitation. "Right here." Marla peeked in headset on. She looked at Vivian, then at Ruby, then at Ethan. Her expression softened just for a second before she turned professional again. "They are ready," Marla said. The auctioneer's voice faded, and the room quieted in that waiting way. A spotlight warmed the stage. The grand piano sat there, not decoration now, a tool. Vivian led Ruby to the edge of the curtain. The crowd was a dark mass beyond the lights. Vivian could not see faces clearly from backstage, only movement and the occasional flash of a phone screen before security stepped in and lowered it. Ruby stepped out first, cane tapping once on the stage floor. Tap. She lifted her chin toward the sound of the room, and then walked to the bench with Ethan beside her. Vivian took her seat in the front row. Her hands shook in her lap. She forced them still by pressing her fingertips together. Ruby sat at the bench. Ethan sat beside her. The room held its breath. Ruby turned her face toward the audience. Her voice was small but clear. "Last year I got scared," she said. "I could not breathe. Then Ethan played. I could breathe again." A quiet sound moved through the crowd. Not quite applause, not quite a sigh. Ruby's fingers found the tape landmarks on the keys. Ethan's hands hovered, then settled. He began the ground pulse gentle and steady like rain on glass. Ruby joined him with the melody. The lullaby filled the pavilion. It was the same shape Vivian remembered, but different now. It had two voices. Ethan held the line that carried weight and memory. Ruby wove brightness through it, finding space where there used to be only ache. Ruby hit a wrong note halfway through. The mistake rang out sharp. Vivian's heart jolted. Ruby froze for one breath. Ethan did not correct her. He kept the pulse. Ruby's fingers slid back to home. Tape under fingertip, ground under her hand. She started again on the next beat, and the melody reformed itself, not perfect, but alive. Vivian's eyes filled. She did not wipe them. She watched Ruby's face, the concentration, and the small smile that kept returning like light breaking through cloud. When the final chord landed, Ethan lifted his hands first, then Ruby. Silence hung in the air long enough to feel like a held exhale. Then the room erupted. People stood. Applause rolled through the pavilion like thunder trapped under glass. Vivian stood too, one hand covering her mouth, the other pressed to her chest like she needed to hold herself together. Ruby turned toward Ethan by sound. "We did it," she whispered. Ethan's smile was shaky real. "You did," he said. Ruby frowned. "We," she corrected and reached for his sleeve again, squeezing like punctuation. Later, after the crowd shifted into chatter and congratulations, Vivian found herself on a narrow balcony corridor behind the main hall glass to one side. City lights blurred by rain on the other. The air smelled like wet concrete and distant salt from the water. Ethan stood there alone, hands on the railing, staring out as if the skyline could tell him what to do with what he felt. Vivian stepped up beside him and did not speak at first. The rain tapped the glass between them and the night. "She was brave," Ethan said, finally, voice low. Vivian nodded. "She was." Ethan swallowed. "She did not stop," he said, "even when she missed." Vivian turned her head toward him. "You taught her that." Ethan's fingers tightened on the railing. "She taught me something too," he said, and the admission came out like it surprised him. Vivian watched his profile. The light from inside caught the edge of his cheekbone, the curve of his ear, the faint line of that scar near his thumb when his hand shifted. "I do not know how to do this," Vivian said, and her voice was quieter than it had any right to be after a night like this. Ethan looked at her. Do what? Vivian's throat worked. Be in something, she said, without trying to run it. Ethan's gaze softened. Then do not run it, he replied. Vivian let out a breath she had been holding for years. Her hand lifted, then stopped hovering near his sleeve the way she used to hover near Ruby when Ruby was overwhelmed. Ethan moved first. He turned fully toward her. His voice was rough. I think about you when I should not, he said. Vivian's pulse hammered. She did not look away. I think about you when I'm supposed to think about everything else, she answered. Ethan's hand came up slow, giving her time to step back if she wanted. He touched her cheek lightly, like he was learning the shape of her as carefully as Ruby did. Vivian leaned into his palm before she could talk herself out of it. Ethan kissed her. It was not polished. It was not practiced. It was gentle and urgent at the same time, like someone grabbing the edge of something true before it slipped away. Vivian's eyes closed. Her hand found his sleeve and held on. Behind the glass, the pavilion hummed with donors and cameras and speeches. Out here, the rain kept tapping its steady rhythm, and Vivian stood close enough to Ethan to feel him breathe. Behind the glass, the pavilion kept breathing. Laughter, plates, the soft scrape of chairs on marble. Out on the balcony corridor, Vivian stayed close enough to Ethan to feel the warmth of his hand, where it had been on her cheek. Rain slid down the window in slow lines, turning the city into a smear of lights. Ethan pulled back first only a few inches. His eyes searched her face like he was checking for regret. Vivian did not give him any. She kept her fingers curled in his sleeve. We should go back, she said, voice quiet. Sidi? Det is så. Ethan nodded once. Yes. They walked in without holding hands, not because they did not want to, but because the room was full of eyes. Ruby was at a table with Marla and Tessa, eating a cookie with both hands. When she heard Vivian's heels, she turned her head and smiled. Mom, Ruby said. Then to Ethan, you stayed. Ethan crouched beside her chair. I stayed, he said, and he sounded surprised that it was true. Ruby reached up and found his face with her fingertips. She traced the corner of his mouth where his smile lived. Good, she said like she had just approved a decision. Vivian's throat tightened. She turned it into a breath and smoothed Ruby's hair once. Time to go, she said. In the car, Ruby hummed the lullaby under her breath. Vivian drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes on the wet road. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, shoulders rigid at first, then slowly easing as Ruby's humming filled the space. At Vivian's building, the elevator opened with a soft chime. Ruby stepped out first, cane tapping. Tap, tap. Ethan followed, carrying Ruby's coat. At the apartment door, Ruby turned toward Ethan. Next Saturday, she said. Ethan looked at Vivian, then back to Ruby. Next Saturday, he answered. Ruby smiled and walked inside, hand-finding the hall rail like it had always been there. After that, the rhythm changed. Not suddenly. Not with a speech. It shifted in small choices. Ethan stopped wearing the suit he had borrowed for the gala and went back to his plain jackets. He started showing up on Saturdays with a paper bag of oranges or a loaf of bread, as if he needed a reason to be there besides the piano. Vivian stopped pretending she did not notice. Ruby grew. Her hands grew stronger. Her left-hand pulse became steady enough that Ethan stopped tapping the bench for her. She could hold the ground by herself. One day in late summer, Vivian came home early and heard music before she opened the door. Ruby was playing Rain and Light in the living room. Ethan sat on the couch, not coaching, just listening. He had his hands folded in his lap, like he was keeping them from reaching for the keys. Vivian stood in the doorway and watched Ruby miss a note find home and continue without looking for anyone's permission. Ethan did not move. He let Ruby recover on her own. Vivian felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had worn so long it had started to feel like bone. That night, after Ruby fell asleep with Mr. Patches under her chin, Vivian found Ethan in the kitchen rinsing dishes that did not need rinsing. The faucet ran too long. Water splashed on his hands. His shoulders were tight. Vivian turned the faucet off gently and set the dish towel in front of him. You do not have to scrub the world clean, she said. Ethan's mouth twitched. It is a habit. Vivian leaned against the counter, watching him dry his hands. Are you okay? She asked. Ethan looked past her toward the living room, where the piano sat in the dark. Some days I am, he said. Some days I am not. Vivian nodded. She did not try to fix it. She stayed there close enough that he could feel her presence without being crowded by it. In October, Ethan quit Harborline Services. He came over one Saturday and told Ruby first. I am not doing the building job anymore, he said. Ruby's head tilted. Why? Because I want to teach, Ethan replied. Ruby's mouth opened into a delighted grin. More kids. Ethan nodded. More kids. Vivian had not announced it to anyone, but the next week a small program appeared under the North Star Foundation banner. Not a press release, just a room rented in a community center with a battered upright piano and a stack of cheap headphones and a box of the same soft fabric tape Ethan used for Ruby. Ethan started with 2 students, a boy who flinched at sudden sound, a girl who spoke in whispers and used her hands to talk. He did not push them toward perfection. He built them landmarks. He gave them pulse. He let them find home. Vivian visited once and stood at the back of the room unseen. She watched Ethan crouch beside the battered piano and say, "Do you hear the rain?" even though it was a clear day outside. The boy's shoulders lowered. Vivian swallowed hard and turned away before her eyes filled. At home, Vivian learned to stop arranging everything. Not always. Sometimes she still caught herself trying to schedule feelings like meetings. Ethan would look at her and say breathe, and Vivian would hate that it worked. There were fights small at first, about Ruby's practice time, about Vivian checking Ethan's lesson plans like they were quarterly reports. Ethan would go quiet, the old invisibility returning. Vivian would push, then realize she was doing the same thing her ex-husband had done, treating the people in her life like problems to manage. One night, Ethan sat on the floor of the music room, with his back against the wall, staring at nothing. Vivian sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and said nothing for a long time. Ethan finally spoke without turning his head. "Today a kid laughed," he said. It sounded like him. Vivian's hand hovered, then settled on Ethan's forearm light. "I am here," she said. Ethan's breathing shook once. He nodded, eyes still on the dark. Ruby bloomed between them. At 9, she performed her first short piece at a school assembly. Finger-steady cane leaned against the bench. She missed one note and kept going. Afterward, she told Vivian, "Proud I did not fall." At 12, she entered a youth competition in Tacoma and came home with a small trophy and a ribbon she kept rubbing between her fingers because it felt like proof. At 14, her teacher at school said the word gifted, and Ruby wrinkled her nose and asked Ethan if gifted meant she had to be perfect. Ethan crouched beside her and said no. "It means you have something to say. You still get to be a kid." Vivian watched Ruby's face soften at that and felt gratitude rise in her chest like warmth. When Ruby turned 16, she asked for a family dinner at the kitchen table. She sat with her hands folded, fingers fidgeting with her napkin. Vivian recognized the tell. Ruby was nervous. "I have been thinking," Ruby said. Vivian and Ethan stayed quiet. "I want to study music for real," Ruby continued. "I do not mean just lessons. I mean school." Ethan's throat tightened. He kept his face steady. "Which school?" he asked. Ruby smiled, small and fierce. "The big ones," she said. "Juilliard, Manhattan School of Music, Curtis." Vivian's breath caught at the names. They sounded far, not just distance. "Wait." Ethan nodded slowly. "It is hard," he said. "The auditions, the pressure." "I know," Ruby replied, "but you taught me I can play through fear." Vivian reached across the table and covered Ruby's hand with her own. Ruby squeezed twice. "Then we will do it," Vivian said. The next 2 years were work, not misery, not punishment, work that filled the house with sound. Ruby practiced before school and after dinner. Ethan coached her on phrasing and stamina. Vivian handled schedules, travel recording equipment, Braille transcriptions. Some nights, Ruby's fingers ached, and she pressed her palms against a heating pad, while Ethan made her play a scale anyway, not because he was cruel, but because he knew what it took to be ready. Other nights, Ruby burst into laughter mid-piece because a wrong note sounded like a duck. Ethan laughed with her. Vivian laughed, too surprised at how easy it could be when she stopped holding her breath. In the end, they made tapes in the music room. Vivian stood by the door silent while Ruby played into microphones. Rain tapped the window during one take, and Ruby smiled without stopping. When the applications were sealed and sent, the house went strangely quiet. Ruby sat at the piano with her fingers on home, not playing, just listening to the rain. Vivian stood behind her, one hand on Ruby's shoulder, and Ethan leaned in the doorway, watching them both, as if he was memorizing the shape of the moment. The waiting did not feel like waiting at first. It felt like motion slowed down just enough to make every sound sharper. The click of Ruby's cane against the hallway rail, the soft thud of her piano bench scooting on the rug, the rain returning and leaving and returning again, steady as breathing. The first envelope arrived on a Tuesday in late winter, thick and stiff, the kind of paper that did not bend easily. Vivian found it on the entry table when she came home from work. The return address was New York, the embossed logo pressed under her thumb like a raised promise. She did not open it. She stood there with her coat still on, staring at the envelope, as if it might bite. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She did not look. Ethan came out of the kitchen wiping his hands on a towel. He stopped when he saw her face. "It came," Vivian said. Ethan's eyes went to the envelope and stayed there. His jaw tightened. "Is it?" he began. Vivian nodded once. Ethan stepped closer and then stopped himself, keeping a careful distance, like touching it would make it vanish. "We wait for her," he said. Vivian swallowed. "We wait." Ruby came home an hour later, cheeks cold from the outside air, hair damp at the edges. She hung her coat by feel and paused, head tilted, listening. "You are both standing still," Ruby said. "That means something." Vivian picked up the envelope and held it out. "It came in the mail," she said, voice too controlled. Ruby's hands found the paper. Her fingers traced the logo, slowly reverent. She exhaled a small sound that was half laugh, half gasp. "It is the one," Ruby whispered. Ethan's voice was rough. "Do you want me to read it?" Ruby nodded fast. "Yes, please." Ethan took the letter out carefully, like it was fragile. The cafe barista noise of the world was gone. The apartment held its breath with them. Even the rain seemed quieter against the windows. Ethan began to read. His voice shook on the first line and he had to clear his throat. "Dear Ruby Hart," he read, "congratulations." Ruby's face opened like a window. Her mouth parted, and then she made a sound that started as a squeak and rose into a shout, pure and startled and bright. Vivian's knees went weak. She sat down hard on the edge of the couch. Her hands flew to her mouth, and then she was laughing and crying, at the same time the way she had not allowed herself to do in years. Ruby reached for Ethan by instinct. She collided with him, arms wrapping around his waist. Ethan dropped the letter and wrapped her up, holding her tight, eyes squeezed shut. Vivian leaned in and pressed her forehead to Ruby's curls, breathing her in like she needed oxygen. "We did it," Vivian whispered. Ruby pulled back and found Ethan's face, with both hands, palms warm against his cheeks. "You read the word," she said. "Say it again." Ethan picked up the letter, with fingers that were not steady, and read the school name slowly, clearly, like a prayer he had not expected to believe in again. Ruby laughed softer now and leaned into him. "Tap, tap," she murmured, as if the rhythm belonged in this moment too. After that, time sped up in a blur of lists and boxes and nerves. Ruby insisted on packing her own things, item by item, mapping every texture with her fingers, so the new life would not feel like a stranger. Vivian bought drawer organizers that snapped into place with a satisfying click. Ethan found a compact keyboard with weighted keys and carried it home as if it was made of glass. The music room filled with stacks of Braille scores and chords and a small recording setup. Vivian labeled everything in raised dots and did not complain once about the mess. Ethan wrote Ruby a piece and did not tell her the name until the last week, when she was already counting down her sleeps like she used to before Saturdays. He played it for her on a quiet evening while rain tapped the window. The melody started low, steady as a heartbeat, then opened into something bright that felt like stepping into air. Ruby cried without trying to hide it. Her hands stayed on her lap, fists clenched like she was holding the sound inside her body. "What is it called?" she asked when the last chord faded. Ethan swallowed. "Rain glass," he said. Ruby nodded, slowly tracing the ridges on her bracelet. "Write it for me," she said, "in Braille." "I already did," Ethan replied, and he set the pages in her hands. The morning they left for New York, Vivian moved through the apartment like she was walking through a museum of her own life. Ruby's room looked too clean without her clothes on the chair and her shoes by the door. The kitchen counter looked too wide. Ruby bounced on her toes in the entryway, cane in hand, backpack on her shoulders. She tried to sound calm, but her voice was high. "I am ready," she said. "I think." Ethan lifted her suitcase and carried it to the car. Vivian followed with a box of dorm supplies, hands gripping the cardboard, so hard the edges pressed dense into her skin. The drive felt both short and endless. Ruby tapped her fingers on her knee. Tap, 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 tap. Ethan kept glancing in the rearview mirror, like he needed to see her to believe she was still there. When they pulled up to the residence building, the sidewalk was crowded with families and rolling carts and half-assembled furniture. A student bumped into Ethan's shoulder and apologized without looking. Ruby smiled at the chaos like it was music. Inside, the elevator smelled like rain-soaked coats and cheap cologne. Ruby stood steady, cane-planted, listening to the hum of voices in the hallway above. Her room was small, bright, and blank. A bed by the window, a desk against the wall, a closet with a door that squeaked slightly when Vivian opened it. Ruby walked to the room slowly, cane tapping corners and chair legs mapping the space. "Window," she said. "Desk, closet. I can feel the sun." Vivian nodded, throat tight. They unpacked for 2 hours. Ethan assembled a chair that came in too many pieces and muttered under his breath. Ruby laughed at him. Vivian organized Ruby's clothes by texture, soft to rough, and tried not to think about how she had once organized her whole life to avoid feeling. When the room finally looked like Ruby lived there, the quiet hit. There was nothing left to do but stand in it. Vivian went first. She stepped into Ruby's space and hugged her so tight Ruby made a small surprise sound. "I am proud of you," Vivian whispered into Ruby's hair. "I am so proud." Ruby hugged back and patted Vivian's shoulder. "You are squeezing like a python," she said, trying for humor, but her voice wavered. Vivian pulled back and cupped Ruby's cheeks. "Call me every day," she said. "Even if you are busy, even if it is 2 minutes." Ruby smiled. "I promise." Then Ethan stepped forward. He looked at Ruby for a long moment without speaking, as if he was trying to memorize the shape of her face with his eyes, the way she memorized his with her hands. "You remember the first thing I told you," he said. Ruby's smile turned soft. "Left hand is the ground," she said. "Right hand is the voice." Ethan nodded. And when it gets loud, he added, "Voice rough, find the rain." Ruby lifted her hand and tapped his wrist twice. "Tap, tap." "I will," she said. Ethan's hands came up, and he hugged her carefully, like he still could not believe he was allowed. Ruby hugged him back hard. No carefulness at all. "Thank you," Ruby whispered near his shoulder, "for being my dad." Ethan's breath shook. "Thank you," he whispered back, "for letting me be." Ruby pulled away and wiped her cheeks with the heel of her hand. "Okay," she said, voice trembling. "You both should go before I start begging you to take me home." Vivian laughed, then cried again. Ethan took Vivian's hand. They walked to the door. Ruby stood by her desk, cane in one hand, the braille pages of Rain Glass in the other. "I love you," Ruby said. "We love you, Vivian," and Ethan said together. They left the room and walked down the hallway. Vivian kept her face forward until they reached the stairwell. Then she stopped and pressed her hand to the wall, breathing hard. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders and held on. In the car, Vivian broke fully. She leaned into Ethan and cried, shoulders shaking, not caring who saw through the rain-streaked windows. "She is going to be okay," Ethan said, voice thick. Vivian nodded, tears running. "I know she managed. That is not why." Ethan kissed her hair, once gentle. He started the car. The city moved around them, wet streets and honking horns, and people hurrying under umbrellas. Back in Ruby's room, the door clicked shut. Ruby stood still for one breath, listening to the quiet she had chosen. Then she set her cane carefully against the wall, unfolded the braille pages on her desk, and sat at her keyboard by the window. Rain tapped the glass. Ruby placed her fingers on home and began to play Rain Glass steady and bright, the notes filling the small room and slipping out into the hallway like light. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.